Good morning. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper LLC, and I'm here this morning with Spencer Tall, the Managing Director of AllegisCyber Capital. Good morning, Spencer.
Good morning.
How you doing?
As well as can be expected.
Yeah.
This is great times we live in, huh?
Yeah, I know. It's very interesting. Both of us are in the Bay Area, so we've been on lockdown for a while.
Yeah.
So to start with, can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Yeah, I started my career working. I'd spent some time during college in Japan, so I speak Japanese pretty well, and I started working for Japanese technology companies right out of school. Did that for 8 years, and then one of the firms I worked for was a Japanese semiconductor distribution house, and all of the U.S. companies that we represented kept trying to hire me to run Asia for them. I asked them, hey, what if we, helped you break into Asia and set your Asia stuff up rather than me coming on full time? Would you be a client in a consulting type of relationship? And that turned out pretty well. So I jumped ship with two other partners, and we started a little consulting firm called Asia Pacific Ventures. And we started helping startups break into Asia, principally Japan, but a lot in Korea and some of the Pan-Asian countries as well. And out of that, along the way, we raised a corporate-backed venture fund in 1996, about $15 million. And the next fund was $85 million, and we've been going ever since then. And so that's how I became a venture capitalist. So I've done the startup thing without funding, we bootstrapped, and then transitioned into venture.
Wow, so you have a very varied background. That's great. So what has been your experience with remote employment, both as an employer and an employee?
It's a good question. When I started as a venture capitalist in 96, remote employees were unworkable.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you had a remote office with a group of people, you always had this, there was a gap. And so you had to get together regularly. There was no Zoom. Nobody even had mobile. We didn't even have email back then. Everything was done by fax. And so it was very hard to build a company culture with remote offices without, super high-end, expensive video conferencing and lots of air travel. So the idea of remote employees was few and far between. We had some of my early investments, they would have some remote coders that could do their code remotely and then send it in. But that was an anomaly. That was not the norm. Over time, we've seen that obviously morph. As a venture capitalist today, I do my job, mostly remotely. I like being in board meetings in person. I think that you get a lot more accomplished by doing that. Plus, our job is to walk around as well and spend time with lots of employees. So I like to get to board meetings early and leave, later after they're over, and just spend time inside of companies. You get a better feel for how the culture's going. You can almost feel it's visceral, but we have seen the idea of a remote employee go from being an anomaly and unworkable to today and not an anomaly. And for taking the coronavirus stuff aside, we've seen tremendous productivity out of employees that work remotely. I mean, you yourself are remote, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, and so you don't see that as that actually it probably lends to your productivity because you can get around to different areas when you need to, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you're not bound to a desk or an office. I mean, right now I'm doing this broadcast from my office, but that's only because it's 5 minutes from my house. And it's the only quiet place around. So, but anyway, I think that this transition has taken place through technology. And then slowly following the technology has been a cultural shift to allow that to happen in a manner that doesn't destroy corporate culture. I do believe, particularly in startups, that gathering often is very important, especially small companies to build that culture. But if employees work, a couple days remote and a couple days in the office, we're seeing a lot of that. My own children, all of them are out of college and working for startups. And at least one day a week, they work from home. And in some cases, my one son's an engineer. He works at least 2 days a week from home. And so they have the ability to be productive and still keep that company culture because you're tapping in, you're coming in, you're meeting people, et cetera. But it's more for critical meetings.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I agree. And you see it's increasing more and more, even before the coronavirus, which has obviously expedited. So what do you think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think needs to be done differently to make it more effective?
Well, I'll tell you, as a security investor, the biggest problem right now is the security of remote employment.
Mm-hmm.
You have vast numbers of employees that are now working from home, and they've never done two-factor authentication.
Right.
One of my companies is called Safeguard Cyber, and they have a product called Safeguard Me. And there's a large bank that'll go unnamed in the UK that is a customer, and they were planning on deploying later this year. And they've come back and said, we've got to deploy now. You got to be done in 4 weeks. We got all these people at home, and they're using WhatsApp as their communication tool.
Oh,
and
wow.
WhatsApp's great, but it's a sieve from a security standpoint.
Yeah.
And so they've got to secure that channel. And so you have a lot of these employees. So when you're in the office, there's certain protocols you have to follow to log onto the system or whatever it may be. But when you're at home, you don't have those, right? You're not in a secure environment. Your kids can come and, dink around with your phone or your computer. And, there are a lot of security vulnerabilities that come with the remote workforce. And so there's going to be a lot of work done in this area.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah.
I think you're actually in a pretty good spot where you are right now, because I think this is about to really expand especially cybersecurity.
We've actually seen tremendous interest from the customers of our cyber companies during this coronavirus thing. So, a lot of my older enterprise software companies have had a big slowdown because nobody's in the office. It's been the opposite for the cyber companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
what's the story behind AllegisCyber Capital, and what's the journey been like?
Well, as VCs, we started out as generalists, and of course, when I started as a venture capitalist, just to put things in perspective, in 1996, America Online couldn't handle more than 18,000 people online at once, right? And a really fast modem was 28.8 KB.
I remember those.
Remember that, right? And so we were dealing in that environment and watching the technological changes that have taken place since then have been amazing. And the reason we became Allegis Cyber from Allegis Capital is about 10 years ago, one of our large limited partners asked us to do a portfolio exercise and take different verticals that we'd invested in, because we'd been broad-based IT. We'd never done healthcare, and we kind of had stepped out of semiconductors. We used to do semiconductors, but they're way too expensive now. So we were, an IT-based fund, and we parsed it into the different categories and did an analysis on our ROI. And the ROI within cyber or security type investing was much, much higher.
Mm-hmm.
And there were two reasons for that when we delved into it further. One is, if you look at IT budgets over the last 10 years, that's the only area that's grown, and it's still growing.
Yes.
Everywhere else is a cost push down. Now, there's cost constraints within your IT budget for security as well, but it is growing as a growing threat. And, there's a way to keep your company completely secure. You just have to have no employees and do no commerce. As long as you're doing commerce and you have employees and you have business partners, you will have vulnerabilities, just in the game. And it's always like this. It's a leapfroggy game, right? So you fix a problem, and then they leapfrog and leapfrog and leapfrog. And so it's a never-ending problem. It's critical to the infrastructure, and it's a growing budget. So those are positives. On the other side of it, the incumbents in this marketplace, every large software company likes to sell a platform. They particularly like to sell a platform when it comes to security. And because of this leapfrogging effect, there's always holes in that platform. And so larger companies, the incumbents, can use channel leverage to take a small company. Let's say there's a $10 million company and somebody pays, $250 million for it. You go, oh my gosh, that's, an incredible multiple on revenue. But then you take a look at that company 6 months later, and it looks like maybe a 4X on revenue because, that small company had 12 salespeople and they were sold to a company that has 600 salespeople, and they channel lever that thing in and go. So as long as the product is fairly solid from an architectural standpoint, they can channel lever it. And so it's a win-win, right? It's a virtuous cycle. They can pay more than we would normally get for a startup, and yet from their perspective, they're getting a discount. So those two factors were part of the reason that we focused our last two funds solely on cyber and did a little bit of a name change.
That's great. That's very interesting, actually, and very appropriate for the current times. Speaking of the current times, with the ongoing pandemic, many companies have been forced to go remote, on short notice. And as a VC, what are some of the major roadblocks and challenges you see them facing?
Well, in addition to the security piece that we already talked about, there's a preparedness factor. So guys like you that have been remote your whole career, you know how to be productive by yourself. Funny, somebody sent me a Spotify playlist for this coronavirus pandemic period. It's all by myself, and there's a whole bunch of songs like that. They're kind of funny. And the question is, can these employees that are used to having a lot of people around be as productive remotely? Because culturally they haven't had to do so. And so there's a lot of training, a lot more touching. My son runs a decent sized sales team inside of a startup. He's got like 15 guys, and they're telesales operation, but it's a rah program. And now those guys are all home, and he got a whole bunch of energy drinks and drove to all our houses and dropped off gift packets and did the appropriate standoffishness, but dropped these things just to keep that kind of camaraderie going, because it's hard to motivate all by yourself. And so I think that's the challenge. The productivity piece is a challenge. You don't know what the person was doing 5 minutes earlier. Did they just pound a beer? You don't know.
Right.
And like I said, people like you and to a greater degree me, right? Because I've always done a lot of stuff remotely. We're prepared for our meetings when we have them, but a lot of employees are just not used to that. And that's a transition. It's a challenge right now. Yeah. Big communication challenges.
Yeah, and I think you and I are in the same boat. Both my kids have graduated from college, and so there are no distractions at home right now,
right?
Which does make it easier, I must admit.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I can't tell you the number of Zoom calls I've been on where little kids are running in and out of the room, and I have one of my CEOs set a desktop up in his car in the garage because he could get Wi-Fi in there. And he said desktop across so that he could sit in there with his computer and stuff and shut the door and he could lock them and the kids could pound on the outside. They can't, he can get some work done.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of innovative. So yeah, there's that piece. And then there's also the infrastructure piece. Not everybody has great Wi-Fi in their home.
Right.
And so we've had situations where people are on Zoom calls and the critical person has their Wi-Fi going down, and that's super problematic and makes the meeting a lot more technologically dependent than it would normally be. I mean, normally in an office, you're dependent upon what the office infrastructure is and the lights and the heat or the air conditioning are on. But your house, now you're in charge of the infrastructure.
Yes.
Right. So you're in charge of your IT, and you got to get on this phone, and you've got to isolate yourself, and hopefully have clothes on. I mean, all of these things. So, I think those are all barriers. So,
No, I agree. It's been interesting the last few weeks. So there are companies like Gabriel that help develop, build, and scale products, especially for startups. So how important do you think setups like this are going to be going forward, especially for startups, that need to hire quality people and quickly?
Well, there's a great attractiveness to being able to work from home and to not have to commute to super expensive areas. I mean, you and I are from the Bay Area. Housing prices here are exorbitant.
Yes.
My kids all live in Utah, and they all own homes. They all own homes. And there's no way they could buy a house in Palo Alto.
Right.
And so, but the ability now to work remotely allows you to mitigate some of those costs. And so I think that's very attractive to people. And so companies need to put in, there are three aspects to it from my perspective, right? One is culture. How do you keep your culture as you build a remote workforce?
Yep.
And the second is how do you have an infrastructure for people at home? Like one of my companies, which will go unnamed, has always had a work from home privilege that you earn, especially as a technical person. And if you earned it, then the company would give you the infrastructure necessary, like a great big monitor at your house and all the other things that you would need so that you could work remotely. And that was an earned privilege. And it turned out that about 60% of our engineers had earned that privilege to work at times from home. So when this thing hit, they were in pretty good shape because their technical team was already kind of ready to go. So there's the infrastructure piece, right? And then this third piece that I was talking about is security. I think those three things have to be solved in order for working from home on a broader basis to be effective. And I still believe, as much remote working has taken place, people still need to see, touch, feel, talk. The nuance. Zoom's great, but it's you lose some nuance. And so I think people still need to get together to just be able to do more remotely and be more productive. And when I was talking about the cultural piece, inside the cultural piece, there's this whole idea of training, right? How to be efficient, right? And then having all the materials that they would necessarily need available, from an infrastructure standpoint, so they can just tap it culturally. And then having cultural touch points, maybe more offsites, just opportunities for people to spend time together, even mini offsites, small groups, just like you would do in an office. Hey, our group's going to go meet in this room over here. Okay, get together at a coffee shop.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things have to be built up inside of companies so that productivity either is at least maintained, but hopefully actually increases. Because one thing we found with our employees that work remotely, the ones that are efficient and smart about it, like yourself, they're actually more productive. And the reason is they never turn off. Do you turn off? I don't.
Actually I do once a day, because I do work from home. I have a thing where I shut off at 5 o'clock and I go to my gym. So I'm actually getting that touchy-feely thing on a regular basis.
I think the gym's great, but then when you get home,
then I don't.
9 o'clock, you're watching a movie and an email comes in. You're going to answer it?
Yes.
That's right. How amazing is that? Because that wasn't the way it was when I started in venture capital in 1996.
No.
Hey, if somebody's home, if you're going to call them, it's kind of rude. It's never rude to text or email because they don't have to answer. We think they don't have to answer, but they do.
Yes.
Well, they just do. Yep. And so so there's an ability, by the way, just from an employer standpoint, a company standpoint, particularly in a startup where people work, crazy hours, you have productive people. And they're not going to just leave their phone lying there.
Right.
And as long as they're not drunk texting, there's a lot of really efficient and interesting things that can get done in the off hours. Plus, some of my best ideas when I'm running, or when I'm working out, or when I'm just contemplating, reading something. You read a story and you go, oh, hey, if I could just tell Jim about this. Well, I couldn't tell Jim about this back in the day.
Right.
And so I'd have to maybe write it down and then I'd forget it, or if I didn't bring it up again, you know what I'm saying? But now it's so important. Text them. Text them. We live in a great society for communication. So if we teach our employees how to do that, we get more productivity out of them if we do this properly.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's funny because I remember the first time I was working at a startup and they gave me my own cell phone. They paid for it. I thought it was great. And then it's like, oh, there's the other side of that. Now, I'm always on, and this is my corporate phone, not my personal phone.
Yeah, it's a tether.
Yes, right. And I still have that same number. They let me keep the number when
That's great. That's great.
That's why I have a 510 number, not a 650 number.
I got it.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that this is but beyond the mobile workforce, the two things that are being fast forwarded dramatically by this pandemic thing we're going through is telehealthcare, virtual healthcare. That's being fast forwarded by at least 5 years, maybe more right now, due to necessity. And because there was some standoffishness, at least from the physician side, for doing this, now there isn't because it's by necessity. And they're finding out that, gosh, this works okay. And the tools right now are not that great. They're going to get so much better.
I know.
And then the other piece is online education. We're beta testing the market at large right now. I don't have kids in college anymore, but I have lots of nieces and nephews who are, and they hate the remote classing
Mm-hmm.
because they want the college experience.
Right.
But I could see some classes being telecommuting. I could see K through 12 moving to, especially maybe 9 through 12, moving to, at least a day a week for telecommuting, or, kids to have their choice. So they have more free time, just, pushing more responsibility towards them.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two things that I think are going to have huge impact. And to move the trend forward by 5 years, it was going to take longer to come about.
Yeah. I mean, actually the Khan Academy had already started that, and, which is also quite close to you actually. So, and I think you're going to see more and more of that.
I think so.
Yeah. So Spencer, this has been great. Thank you for taking the time today to talk to me.
No problem.
I wish you luck in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a great day.
All right.
Bye.